Let's get started. Fundamentally, I would like to sort of say thank you to Copenhagen FinTech. Without their support, this proof of concept would not have been possible. I've been hugely privileged to sort of have their support in this opportunity and allowed sort of through their initial funding mechanisms to also partner with a number of important organizations, principally Matter, who is also sort of a darling of Copenhagen FinTech, which is an ESG data provider who helped sort of design and support the introduction or sort of the development of this initiative. I've been most interested in understanding how Danish boards are sort of positioned when it comes to sustainability generally and ESG readiness. And the term readiness has been sort of massaged for a long time. I used to have the term competence here, but this has sort of been shifted to more ready. Are our boards ready for the challenges, both from a policy standpoint, from a transition standpoint, a financial standpoint, to think about sort of the critical risks that all of their organizations are facing? And this is what I'm going to be talking to you today about. Just a little background myself, I'm associate professor. I run the ESG minor at CBS, so I train about 150, 170 master's level students on topics of ESG. Through our minor, I also provide executive education, and the students of life, as we were discussing, I also am an ESG advisor for a London-based hedge fund where I actually work and use these tools effectively. So I also sort of see it not just in the White Tower of University, I see it in practice. The inspiration for the work that emerged in support with Copenhagen FinTech came from an article in the Harvard Business Review where it says boards are obstructing ESG at their own peril. My colleague Tansy Whelan at NYU Stern came out with this article where she did a sort of a basic assessment of boards of the S&P 500. And her conclusion was ultimately that the American boards or the company boards that were listed on this index or indices were sort of significantly potentially causing challenges for the uptake of ESG, and still further sort of the ability for implementing, adopting, and funding sustainability initiatives within the companies they served. I teach a lot of US MBA students, so I have about 4 or 5 times a year my MBA students from America, from the top Ivy League schools, come and I teach them. And what has happened is I sort of said to myself, I can't claim that Denmark is the land of milk and honey, right? Whereby we're so sustainable without really understanding Danish boards. So I wanted to test that critically. Still further in the backdrop, you'll probably remember one of these people, Jordan Peterson, had Vivek Ramaswamy, Ramaswamy is thinking about going and running for president, where this whole woke capitalism, they're fighting against woke capitalism. And right now, Uncle Joe, or President Joe Biden, is threatening to veto a motion that's going through Congress whereby they're trying to outlaw the application of ESG in the United States. So this is sort of an interesting exercise, and it's very timely. Well, fundamentally, the importance of board sustainability competences is critical. And I'm not going to go into all the regulations. I understand everyone is dealing with constant EU requirements, whether it's CSDD, whereby now boards of directors are going to be held liable for both short-term and long-term risks on their supply chains. And also they'll have specific requirements to understand their climate strategies and have incentives for that. And still further, the CSRD requirements also require that companies map the diversity of their boards and understand fully also what does it take, for example, to think about double materiality. This new idea of not just thinking about what is the financial impact of climate change on the company, but how does the company contribute to making the world a better place. And lastly, let's just not forget Shell directors personally sued over flawed climate strategies, right? And then also the world's biggest investment fund in Norway, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, is emphasizing that they'll be voting against board members who are not enforcing, maintaining, or adopting sufficiently stringent or appropriate climate strategies. You're going to see a lot of that. BlackRock has also emphasized this point, though BlackRock's tensions in the United States have probably weakened its position, and Larry Fink's letters will not be as relevant for setting the ESG phase as they were, for example, 3 years ago. Now, the philosophy of our work under this initiative was, could we pulse check boards and assess their sustainability fit? Could we understand what are the gaps? Can we improve those gaps? I don't want to fire every board person. I want to lift every board and understand how those sort of board members can be supported in their learning journey so that they can best serve the companies that they're required to do so. Now, I'm always amazed at how board members and companies alike are shocked by this gap or shocked by the fact that they're being evaluated. Yes, boards are being evaluated already in the current landscape or the suite of tools that are out there provided by ESG data providers, whether it's ISS, MSCI, Sustainalytics, Refinitiv. These are all the usual names. But if you look on the key themes that are covered, it's primarily looking at independence, diversity, and diversity in a very sort of binary concept, male, female. And then also if there's some incentive models and so on and so forth. But does this really tell us about how aligned or capable is a board to interpret, understand, and effectively respond to the challenges or the climate or sustainability related challenges that a firm faces? Our thesis was that these tools do not. So what is the methodology that we worked on in our proof of concept? I'm sure you all have questions or ideas of how you would love to assess board members. And what we did is, based on the best literature and combining all the indicators that were used to assess boards, we assembled those methodologies and those specific indicators into one. And we're successful in assessing all Danish boards that are publicly traded. And today I'm going to show you sort of a subsection of the C25, sort of to see how our best performers in our largest Danish companies are faring. Now, you may sort of think about, you would like to see more indicators here, but what we were able to do is split it between competence and ability. And in the competence section, we were looking at professional and academic backgrounds. Now, professional, we would look at employment roles relating to sustainability, commercial or academic. Did they hold positions that were able to sort of to give them enough expertise in this area? And I'm not talking about having positions with the title sustainability or chief sustainability officer or VP of sustainability. I'm talking about change management. I'm talking about human resource management. I'm talking about supply chain management roles, thinking about these topics. So if you become a specific expert in these areas, and if you've worked for, and we're being very generous in this methodology, at least 1 year or full-time, or over the course of 5 years part-time across these roles, you will be deemed as competent. We also look at, did you work at a sustainable firm, right, in the past 10 years? And we take the corporate Knights benchmark, which is very interesting, where they list the 100 most sustainable companies in the world. Denmark has been privileged on that list for many, many years, and we hold a number of positions on that list. Still further, if you have a B Corp status or under your umbrella under the umbrella structure of your company, do you have a sub-entity that has on the B Corp as sort of status? That's quite common. We've seen that there's experiments in the B Corp space for sub-entities. You get points for that. If the individual, for example, has sat on related committees, governance committees also included, sustainability committees, remuneration committees. And then number 4, what about the service, right? Do they give back to Dansk Erhverv, Dansk Industri? Do they help set policy? Do they inform industry? Do they offer their time to NGOs, IGOs, government agencies? This should also be recognized. Added to that, we include academic scores for their degree. And I'm not just talking about your degree title. We're going down to the individual course names. So I mean, in this context, if you studied labor economics, if you were in biotech or pharma or in healthcare, right, in terms of patient safety, if you've been looking at sort of sustainability issues relating to supply chain management, you should also be rewarded. And then added to that, we give a multiplier where, for example, we look at your influence Are you a silverback gorilla with lots of experience on boards and understand the political ramifications? Or do you have international experience, right? In Denmark, we primarily look to America as the sort of the gold standard of international experience, but should you not have a person on your board who is experienced in your biggest growth markets, such as, for example, the Middle East or India? That could be a very important component to understanding the capacity of that board person. And then still further, lifelong learning. How willing are you to upgrade your skills? On the topic of lifelong learning, that is probably the most gendered indicator we've collected. Women are constantly being forced to prove their capacities and continue to take certificates and illustrate their competences, where sadly for the male counterparts, and also within certain disciplines, it almost seems as though they have stopped learning once they've left their universities. Has to be fixed. Nonetheless, there are certain male candidates in this area who are great, brilliant examples of lifelong learning. So then there's no exception or no excuse. So what do we do? Okay. Every board has a specific set of risks that they must face. And so from a financial perspective, we take the company and we lay over the SASB accounting methodology that allocates a certain number of the 23 risk indicators to that company. So for example, if you're in pharma, you have specific risks versus if you're in food processing versus whether you're in consumer goods, fashion sector. Each company has a risk profile that the board members should be able to respond to. So we collect each score and we weight it 60-40. You may debate that allocation. I'm sure certain engineers would say that their professional or their academic scores should be weighted heavily, more heavily than their professional scores, or maybe not. And then we add the multiplier and we have a total board score for example, 12 people, and that we weight it with a sort of, well, we produce a sort of a competence score of up to 100. 100 means the board is, or level 5, is perfectly aligned with the risks that have been laid upon them by the financial sector. I am enough a rationalist to understand that we will never get to 100, but I would have a strong desire to see that all Danish boards are in the levels of a high 3 or in the 4 category. That would mean that they have the capacity to respond to when things go wrong. We have spent the past 10 years of rewarding, slapping on the back, and sort of pontificating, encouraging these board people to say how fabulous they are in the midst of a general market rise. But we have not been really questioning them when the market turns. And when you want to assess boards, it's not for, when all the tide is moving up, right? It's actually, in the words of Warren Buffett, you want to see who's swimming naked when the tide goes out, right? So we want to sort of assess what happens to these boards if something goes wrong, how they can respond to those challenges, right? So let's take a little illustration of our findings. And you're more than welcome to contact me directly. If you're a specific company, I can show you that in more detail. Or if you're interested in how these metrics were built, please do reach out. Well, just to give a little background, also I presented this information to a board education program, which was very interesting. Needless to say, board people have a certain personality type that doesn't lend them to always willingly want to be evaluated. They specifically don't like that. And in a Danish context, I realized I had to do more than just evaluate all Danish boards. I had to do something that would really challenge Danish board people, and that would be compare them to Swedish boards, right? That would be if they were worse than Swedish boards, they would have a heart attack, or Norwegian boards or Finnish boards. So this is what we did. We expanded our data set to include Norway, Sweden, Finland, Germany, and Switzerland. And we took a sort of a similar C25 methodology for the top firms in those countries. And then we could benchmark that against the Danish counterparts. So think about, of those countries, Switzerland, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland, which boards are most aligned or have the skills that are most aligned to the risks those specific companies face. Think about that. Which boards do you think are better? And now I will show you. Critically, if we look at a country comparison, and you can see all the different role, firm, committee scores, so on and so forth, the Swiss boards are outperforming the C25. Now, the good thing here is that the Danish boards overall are outperforming the Swedish boards. And then you can see sort of it's followed by the Finnish boards, the Norwegian, the Germans. However, what's interesting is that there's a huge sort of significant separation with the Danish boards, all the other companies that are traded on the Danish stock exchange. You could look at it in a different way, right? For example, we've built this platform where you can actually look at the gap. The Swiss boards are rewarded because they have structures that have committees primarily, which is very interesting. Still further in a Danish context where education is now being challenged through the new one-year program and so on and so forth. What's very noteworthy about Danish boards is that they're the most educated boards out of all the countries that we've selected. So which is quite particularly interesting. Now, bear in mind, 100 would be perfectly aligned. The average across all these countries and these indices is 19.1. So needless to say, there's huge room for improvement, both in terms of training, in terms of selection, in terms of design of the mechanisms. Now, let's go sectoral assessments. Obviously, if we were looking in the Danish context for the C25, information technology, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, electricity, transport, highly regulated sectors are outperforming the rest. I'm hopeful that insurance and clothing will improve their capabilities, but it's quite obvious that, for example, information technology, the level of competencies is noteworthy. Added to that, I hope you take a look at this list. We can go through it. Based on our methodology, these are the top performing C25 boards. And we can also go in any detail what's important. Right? GN Store, Noah, Novo Nordisk, Novozymes, Kristjan Jespersen, Ørsted. Some of them you would say ultimately made a lot of sense, but you can still see there's huge gaps which are causing potential risks for the firm, and the financial sector should take note ultimately as to where these gaps are, and in their engagement start encouraging boards to improve. There is room for improvement universally. So average score is 22.2. And then added to this, I'm going to be honest with you, it's actually a requirement under the Danish corporate governance requirements, subclause 2.2.2. The committee recommends that the chairperson, in cooperation with individual members of the board of directors, ensure that the members are up to date and supplement their knowledge of relevant matters. If that is the case, why is there not more training, education that is specific to the company? I can tell you right now, the current education relating to boards given by both board education programs and also by consulting firms is of a general knowledge and is not bespoke, focused, or directed towards the company's specific needs in question. That has to change. No longer can we just give a checkbox training session and assume that we have removed liability risk from the boards. They have to be actively engaged, learning, and participating. I can see many use cases, and we're expanding this in a many number of ways. Well, one, regulators and industry bodies, we have to start pushing this further. We need to use this for engagement, industry collaborations. We need to sort of lift all ships, right, in this direction. Boards should start thinking about ecosystems of skills as opposed to who they go to school with. Something that's been very fascinating is that we've been able to study that in comparison to Sweden and Norway, who are looking for boards with specific educational backgrounds and experiences, the Danish boards are still relying primarily on educational ties. Some of you may think that that's not unusual, knowing sort of this sort of high trust Danish system, but that's not going to work. Having gone to school, having gone to a training program at INSEAD where you met the chairperson of the board and you got a position should not be the sign of a profile of success. Still further, universities, CBS, others need to start thinking about how do we do more trainings, research, how do we embed this into our corporate governance education, and then still further, how can we start challenging boards through AGMs to think about how to do this further. I'm going to leave it there. I thank you very much. I know it's been a sort of a whirlwind, but I just want to emphasize this thought experiment that's been supported by Copenhagen FinTech has been one of the most exciting research endeavors I've gone through, and I, sort of look forward to the next iteration. One, we want to go backdate. I want to go back 6 years in time so I can actually see, are more diverse boards resilient when it comes to, for example, COVID? Were the boards able to handle those risks effectively? We don't know. That would be a perfect use case. And then still further go to America and test at NASDAQ and S&P 500, and then, challenge our system of thinking, saying, okay, maybe there's competencies in America we've not interpreted, or how can we also scale this product more generally? Thank you very much.